Hello and welcome to Web Development 101 with Alex Merced. On this show, we'll talk about all the basic concepts of web development in a way that anyone can understand, whether it's front-end web development, back-end web development, and full-stack web development. If you're new to web development, I recommend listening from episode 1 to understand all the concepts from beginning to end. You can also learn more about my own personal projects over there at alexmercedcoder.com. Thank you.
Hey everybody, this is Alex Merced from alexmercedcoder.com, and basically today now we're going to venture off beyond sort of the browser. So again, basically those first few episodes we're talking about the technologies that a browser can handle. Okay, so those are the web standards. Now I want to talk about today's front-end framework. So we're still in the front end, so we're still kind of talking, so we haven't quite completely gotten away from the browser yet. But what I want to talk about today is front-end style and component frameworks and why they matter. Because if you're going to be a professional web developer, you're going to need to know at least one or two of each. And there's a couple really sort of main ones that most people use in the professional space. There's many that exist. Again, if you're just doing it for yourself, then you can just choose whatever framework you want to work with and work with it. Okay, and get your project done, whichever tool you think does what you need the best. So what's a style framework? So when I talk about style frameworks, these are generally CSS scripts that are also combined with some JavaScript, but they're basically there to help you design your user interface. The most popular and well-known one is Bootstrap. So you'll hear Bootstrap a lot, and it's definitely by far the elephant in the room as far as what people use. Okay, right now the most recent version is Bootstrap 4. And generally what happens is the way these work is that built into the CSS and JavaScript is, again, a lot of the usually all the basic components of a website, like, styles for navigation, for having like scroll bars, drop down menus, to have a grid style for your website. What that means is that to make it really easy for you to have that sort of column, 12 grid column, so that way you can make 3 columns, 4 columns, up to 12 columns. Okay, and so which allows you to really kind of do some cool stuff designing your website. So basically all sorts of stuff sort of built into it. And then the JavaScript helps enhance a lot of those components. So that way your slider works, your drop-down menu works, all that. So usually you have those two files. You have a CSS and you have a JavaScript file. And the other big benefit of these frameworks is that they have mobile responsiveness built in. So oftentimes the whole issue of, how should this look like on a tablet? How should this look like on a mobile phone? You don't have to really worry about that as much because it's kind of built in. Or the ability to do so is a lot easier. Okay, so if you've done some of the CSS stuff, if you checked out some of the tutorials I mentioned, you probably have done a little bit about making things responsive for a smaller screen. And it can be time consuming. It's not hard, but it's time consuming. So having these kind of frameworks that kind of have a lot of that stuff sort of out of the bucket saves you a lot of time. Okay. Now, of course, always the downside is when you're using sort of a framework, like especially a UI framework, it's a lot of times kind of they can be very recognizable. So if you don't customize it a little bit, people will be like, oh, that's a Bootstrap website. That's a Materialize website. Materialize is actually, I really enjoy the Materialize framework, which is sort of probably the second most well-known one, I think, along with like UIKit and Bulma and many of the others. But basically, Google came out with sort of this sort of standard for designing a website or like appearance of a website called Material. And it just kind of, and it's more of like a theory. So like, this is how things should look like, shadows, all this kind of stuff. So Materialize was a styling framework built upon that logic. And then there's other sort of frameworks that have built based on Google's sort of Materialize thing. Okay? Or material design. So when you hear that buzz phrase, you know what that means. Okay, so that's styling framework. So again, they help you. They basically out of the box kind of help you with responsiveness of your website, with building out a lot of the sort of the visual stuff. Okay, because again, it's not hard to code out navigation menus, footers, stuff like that. But if you can save yourself a lot of the time, why not? Okay, you can always add in your own CSS on top of those frameworks to color things the way you want and change some of the design aspects as you would like. But then a lot of the stuff that you don't want to have to just reinvent the wheel for are there outside of the box. Now, Materialize has a lot of color stuff already built into it, which is one of the reasons why initially, as I started learning, I used that one more often, because that way I can just use the built-in color schemes and a lot of it does have a very particular look. So it's much easier to tell when someone's using Materialize. Well, Bootstrap, you can download, totally forget, there's a website where you can actually find versions of Bootstrap with color themes built into it, but it doesn't really have a color theme built into it initially. So you have to go back and kind of do the colors, which then, you take time to do that. So which is why I kept using Materialize very often in the early days. Well, as I was getting used to these sort of styling frameworks. Also, I just really like the Materialize documentation. And that's also a big thing with any technology you use, is you're not going to know everything about everything. And even the few things that you do know a lot about, you probably don't know everything all of the time. So you're oftentimes going to have to refer to tutorials, to documents. So great documentation, great community to be able to ask questions to. These things matter a lot. They make life a lot easier. I know if there wasn't a lot of people on Stack Overflow who could answer my questions, or great documentation with examples and tutorials to help me understand the concepts better, certain things would take me a lot longer to figure out if I could figure them out. Well, I could figure them out, but it would take a lot longer and a lot more trial and error. So that's something to keep aware of. So that's a styling framework. Now for a component framework. So generally what happened in the past, you would, again, do the structure of your website in HTML, the colors in CSS, and the behavior in JavaScript. And then you'd have it all in like 3 separate files. Over time, people are kind of moving away from that, and that line is blurring. So instead of breaking up your website based on sort of style, structure, function, you are breaking your website up into components. Okay, so basically the style, the function, and the structure of your navigation menu would all be within one component. Okay, and you'd create, basically everything's now component designs. That way, and then the components are then rendered down into pretty much HTML tags. And then basically, if you're going to use the same navigation menu on 10 different pages, you just slap that navigation menu tag on there. And if you want to change your navigation menu, you just change that component file that describes that component. Okay. So this makes life a lot easier. And then also this opens up the world of what's called a single page application. So instead of actually having 10 different pages, index.html, site.html and whatnot, and having to, edit the code in 10 different files, what if you could just have it all on one page? And that's what's referred to as a single page application. So by using JavaScript, you can change what's going on the screen. So it looks like you're going to different websites, but it's really just the JavaScript re-rendering what's on the screen real time. Okay. And these are what's called a component framework or a front-end JavaScript framework. And there's 3 sort of big ones. Okay. They're huge. The one that everyone kind of knew first was Angular. Okay, Angular was developed by Google. I actually don't have much experience with Angular per se. Most of my experience is with React. But Angular was developed by Google. It uses a scripting language called TypeScript along with JavaScript. And it does this sort of component design and a bunch of other stuff. Now, basically, Angular was dominant, and it's still fairly dominant. But basically, I guess with the stories, as I hear it, is that when they updated it, because what happened is that React comes along. React is created by Facebook. Okay, and what they do with React is that the way you code it, you're not using TypeScript. You use what's called JSX. And what JSX is, essentially, it looks a lot like basically you're just programming HTML into your JavaScript. So instead of having to think of your HTML code through JavaScript syntax, you just put in the HTML inside of JavaScript functions. So in that case, you're just saying, hey, I want this HTML here. You just say, that's the HTML I want there, which can be very, very convenient. And then you can also just plop your components within other components, and you're just kind of, for the most part, operating within almost HTML almost of the time outside of the normal JavaScript logic. And this was really cool. Okay. Also, what was really innovative with React was sort of the way that it would render real time. So essentially, the way React works is that if you imagine like a tree, so basically, remember how I was kind of talking about in a previous episode, the document object model, and there's like a tree. So basically, your body is sort of like, let's say that a tag maybe one branch, and then other elements on your websites are another branch, and then they have child elements, etc. So what the React virtual DOM does is that it's constantly scanning for changes based on your code to different sections of the website. But instead of just re-rendering the whole website based on a change, which takes a little bit more time, it'll actually only swap out the piece of code that needs to be swapped out. So this way it runs a lot faster. So React was sort of really fast, okay? And then plus with this JSX syntax, it was, easy to kind of just use HTML in there. Okay, so while people really like TypeScript, and a lot of people really like Angular, and they still use Angular, that speed, some of those aspects, Angular 1 didn't have. Okay, so then they create Angular 2, which embraces some of these sort of aspects, particularly sort of the way it embraces mainly like sort of the virtual DOM aspects and some of the speed things that sped it up, but also was a fairly drastic change to Angular. So when they released Angular 2, apparently there wasn't enough of a heads up or whatever, it ended up breaking a lot of Angular 1 based websites when people upgraded, causing leaving a bitter taste in a lot of people's mouths. So this is when this kind of hurt Angular's sort of number one spot. Angular 2, from what I hear, is a great framework. It kind of addresses all the issues that were with Angular 1, and people who are using Angular 2 and learning Angular 2 now really like it. But a lot of the people who were on Angular 1 and got burnt from the switch over, that definitely left a mark that made room for React to capture more market share. So now React is kind of like the big dog in the room now. Then there's a third. And so you have Google's Angular, Facebook's React, and then you have Vue.js, which the guy who made Vue, it's pronounced Vue, I forget if he's former Facebook or former Google, but he's a former developer, one of those. And basically he took like the best parts of React and the best parts of Angular. So you have the TypeScript from Angular, a lot of the best aspects of that syntax and whatnot, and turned it into Vue. And the Vue is, even though it doesn't have like this big company support like a Facebook or a Google, it's been growing wildly. And and then the thing is that it has a lot of other really cool features with it, far as how it renders components. And most of my experiences with React, so I don't know as much about Vue, but I've watched some videos, and they actually have like a GUI server, so you can actually, which neither of the other two I think have at the moment. But that's a really cool feature. So Vue has some really, really cool stuff for it. So that's a big one. Now there's other ones like Backbone, Ember, Meteor, Mithril that are out there and people use. I don't know much about them, but you have plenty of options as far as front-end frameworks. And then there's something that I'll talk about a lot later called ActiveScript that allows you pretty much with any of these frameworks to actually create mobile applications. But we're going to make a whole episode just for that later on. So now we know about some front-end frameworks in the JavaScript world. We know about some style frameworks like Bootstrap and Materialize. Hopefully you guys learned a lot. Check me out over there at alexmercedcoder.com where you can see a lot of the stuff I'm working on and learn more about me. Thank you very much. Have a great day and enjoy.